Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the broadcast. This is the Evoke Therapy Program broadcast, and today is Tuesday, March 31st. So, tonight, in the middle of the pandemic, we thought we would bring on my partner and our executive director, Rick Heiser. Rick also serves as the program director for our Evoke Cascades program. So, Rick's here to answer any and all of your questions related to COVID, programming, what we're doing with our students and staff to keep everybody as safe as possible. I, of course, will be here to answer any clinical questions you have. So it looks like no questions have come in, Rick. Maybe you can start off with some general thoughts about as you've been managing our response to COVID, kind of the evolution of where we started and kind of the big picture about where we're at right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brad. And again, I'm Rick Heiser, the executive director and one of the owners. And good evening. Welcome, everybody. And just Brad and I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to come on and answer any questions that you might have. And I know Brad has been doing a great job at informing you all of the things that we've already been doing. Starting at the very beginning of March, we started to implement changes, and a lot of what we were doing were already addressing some of those concerns as far as on the medical side of hygiene and keeping both the participants and the employees healthy. One example of that is that if you have a fever, you're not allowed to come to work as an employee. So that is something that's very common that we're seeing across the country now, as far as the fever being taken, if you have a fever not coming to work. And that's something that we were already doing, along with a lot of the hygiene type things. And so one of the first notice, and we have, if you don't know this already, on our website, have running updates that pretty much weekly I will put another update on there of things, additional measures, additional information, and a lot of resources like this webinar, podcasts, blogs, things like that are all on that webpage on our website. And since the beginning of March, sometimes a couple times a week, sometimes just once a week, you'll see updates on there. Everything from protocols that we're taking around hygiene, some about screening, some about just the admission process, having more strict screening process around that, and even changing some of the things in the field, like that's not on the website, is like shelters, where we used to sleep as a group almost every night, which was a great camaraderie and come together. And sometimes the staff would read a book to the student. Well, almost every night they would be doing something like that with the students. It was a great opportunity to kind of come together. And now we're having everybody separate, still in the same camp all together, but we're all having everybody have their own shelter 10, 15 feet apart. So there's things ranging from program changes in the field to the process that we're taking with our staff as well. So I can elaborate more on some of those things, or I don't know if anybody has any questions.
We don't have any questions yet. I think we're open and accepting admits right now. Maybe you could talk about some of the differences with the screening. What are you doing on a case-by-case basis to make sure that we're reducing the risk of bringing COVID into the field?
Absolutely, because I'm assuming a lot of folks on here are current parents, and that has been a question that I've talked to several of you about, of like, what about the risk of bringing it in? My kid's been there for a month. We know it's not there. What are the measures being taken? So we are doing as much as we can on the front end before a client even comes to us, that they're being practicing social distancing, staying at home, doing that for at least 14 days before they go to our program. We can't guarantee that. We believe that parents are doing their best to try to do that. And again, we don't know for certain when that's happening. And so that's why we're taking additional measures. Up till this point, we've been asking families to drive, which limits the interactions through flying, and just helps be able to control a situation in general more, as far as where you're going, when you're stopping. And we will do additional screening as far as where a client might be coming from. And if someone's coming from, for example, New York City, we're going to be a lot more specific about what they've been doing, what kind of supervision they've had, and the screening and quarantining they do when they do get to us. Right now, we've been quarantining the kids in the group, in the field. This is new that we just decided today that we'll be starting in the next weeks, is we'll be doing a quarantine group where anybody who comes in goes to this specific group for 2 weeks before they go into their individual groups. Right now, up till this point, the kids have been going in the individual groups and then just staying off away from the rest of the group for 2 weeks, just to make sure that they're not showing any signs and symptoms before they're becoming a full part of the group that way.
Let me
Yeah.
let me read this
Let
one,
me
Rick.
read this one, Rick.
I'm getting an echo
I'm getting an
now,
echo now,
but I'll read it
but I'll
anyway.
read it anyway.
Or maybe you can read it, Rick, since I'm getting an echo. Well, the echo's gone.
Yeah, it's asking about, they were supposed to come for a visit in February and it was canceled. He should be coming home soon, by the end of April, and we've had one FaceTime session. I'm having trouble assessing his readiness to come home without having more contact with him. I know you're all doing your best in a tough situation. Is there any way we could do something to increase contact, substitute for a visit? Much of the issue is our relationship. Absolutely, and that's going to be, I'm going to hand this off quickly to Brad because it's going to become a clinical issue. As far as the safety executive director position, we're not going to be doing visits anytime soon. As far as, is there potential to do more FaceTime, Zoom, video interactions? It's a possibility, and I'm going to hand that off to Brad with the assumption that it's going to be more of a case-by-case, up to the therapist kind of situation.
Yeah, we've been encouraging our therapists to increase both something like a FaceTime therapy session and also therapy phone calls. So it's always this balance of making sure that we don't want to have it be such a sterile situation where only students who are operating and functioning at the highest level are having family therapy sessions. And so we want to bring you into the process where still there might be some conflict, there might be some problem solving, some difficult communication that goes on. So, and I'll reemphasize this with our therapist, as we talk about this now, I'll reemphasize this on a daily basis. Be creative about allowing for FaceTime visits. Use some of your time in the field where you would be doing therapy with the client or the student and introduce either a therapy phone call or a therapy FaceTime visit. Sometimes what that looks like is then the client or the student will have to get in the vehicle with the therapist and drive a few miles from camp with a staff member where there might be better reception to cell phone towers. So that's a little bit of a challenge. So we completely understand the frustration, and like you said, we're doing the best that we can in a difficult situation, and we want to make sure that we give you guys some more exposure and some more practice to make up for the fact that there's going to be limitations to the in-person visits due to the COVID issues and quarantining that we're doing, the social distancing that we're doing. So that's something I'll continue to emphasize with all of them, continue to ask them to be creative and to create more times, and reminding them that don't wait until a student is going to be, again, behaving at an optimal level or a near optimal level, but bringing them in when there's still some rough edges so that parents can have practice at dealing with old behaviors and regressive behaviors. So that's the way that I would answer that. Someone says parents visits are canceled. So do the kids are reassured that they're going to be picked up? I'm not sure I have the answer to that question, Rick, because each student is being communicated to by their therapist with what we think they need to know for the ending. Some of you might be familiar that we've historically operated on a no future information policy. It's a phrase that's become commonplace over the years where you're just talking about the here and now. So students or clients have limited warning about their departure. Typically, what I've said recently on some of these emotionally supportive of COVID-related broadcasts is the fact that I think we're all dealing with no future information. When Rick and I and our partner Matt are talking on a weekly basis about what we should do and how we should prepare for things, we say on almost every phone call, we're going to have to take it a day at a time because we don't know what the information is going to be 2 days, 3 days, a week from now. We can take an educated guess, but we don't know for sure. And so the answer to your question is it really depends on the therapist and where they're at. About half of my clients historically wouldn't find out until their departure, until maybe the day of or the day before, because we wanted to keep them present. The other half, I would actually give them that information, not because it was a privilege or easier, but actually because it presented a challenge to the client or student where they had to practice their skills to stay present. So it's still going to be managed by the therapist one-on-one, and there's still going to be some limitations for future information because that's a part of the program and the practice that we have to try to help clients and students remain present where they're at, not pack their bags early, so to speak, or sit on their trunks, as they say in the Army. Do you have anything to add, Rick?
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
one?
I would just add that if the question is like, do the kids know that they will be picked up when it is time to leave? Yes, that's all the same.
Yeah.
With everything that Brad just said, the kids do have some information out there of what's going on. I mean, it's somewhat limited to the extent that we're exposed to it, but they know what's going on. They know that the parent visits and visits to the field aren't happening, but they would still know, okay, your departure date is planned for 2 days from now, and you will be getting picked up um, at the office or wherever that pickup is scheduled. So they do know, they definitely know that if and when it's time for them to go, that they will go. They don't think that they're stuck or trapped there by any means.
No. A parent asked the question, are you seeing anything from aftercare providers regarding how the pandemic's affecting new enrollments? Um, we can both comment on that a little bit. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, I don't know how much people are aware of this, but we are an industry that shares a great deal, both in the wilderness field, but with other residential treatments as well. And so we do a lot of collaborating and sharing. And so, yes, I've been hearing a lot in talking to a lot of other programs and what they're doing. Some residential programs have closed their door. The timing was spring break, and their kids were either on their way or already at home for spring break, some of them, and they decided the easiest thing to do is just to put everything on pause and shut the doors temporarily. Some programs are open for business and operating a normal program with additional measures taken. So there's a range of approaches that people have taken. Most residential programs are still open and are taking added precautions, particularly when it comes to where's this kid coming from. When they're coming from wilderness, they're very happy for that because they know that they've been basically quarantined for a long time and what condition that they're in. If they don't know, they're taking their own quarantine measures. So you'd have to check in with the individual programs as far as specifically what they're doing. A lot of the programs that we work with are part of NatSap, a larger trade organization, and they also are providing a lot of resources for those residential programs as far as risk management and measures they should be taking.
And I don't really think I have a lot to add to that. So I think there are going to be some limitations in terms of the flow of students to aftercare, but not dramatic, not really large differences, just some small differences. Matt, our clinical director at our Entrada program, our partner, was telling us this week that he's talking to educational consultants much earlier in the process about aftercare options and directions because it's taking a little bit of extra planning on their part to kind of prepare for the eventual date. Somebody asked us the question, is COVID-19 affecting the students' duration of the program? Do they have to stay longer as a result? I don't know that data. Rick? I mean, I know anecdotally that people have said that there's been a little bit of shuffling, but
Well,
for the
there
most,
hasn't been any. Yeah, there hasn't been. Sorry, Brad. There hasn't been any significant change of length of stay, shorter or longer. There was initially some couple parents that I've talked to wanted to were thinking, should I come and get my son, my daughter now? But it was just a question. It hasn't affected length of stay in any being shorter or longer.
this next question, Rick, was one I first asked you until I understood your explanation. So I'll ask it so you can explain. Somebody asked the question, not sure I understand the logic of the quarantine group. If client A is on day 11 in the quarantine group, when client B joins the group, couldn't client B infect client A? That was the
That's a
exact
great
question.
question. That's a great question. So we will limit the days that the students come in. So for example, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, maybe Thursday, but the shorter we make that, the less of this issue we have to deal with. And so if you're a parent looking to place your kid in Evoke, our admissions people say, okay, they can come, but they'll have to come next Tuesday or Wednesday. Those are the 2 days that they can come in. And so we'll take 4, 5, 6 admits on those 2 days and have them all in the same group. And then that group is closed. That group and the staff, nobody else will go into that group. It'll be the same staff for 2 weeks and the same students, clients in that group for 2 weeks. No one will be else will come into that group.
Right. In fact, Rick and I first met. I don't want to take too long of a detour, but Rick and I first met in 1996, in the spring of 1996, when I was a brand new therapist and Rick was a brand new field staff. And just prior to our beginning of that program, this is the way that the program that we worked at operated all the time. They brought in clients all on 1 or 2 days a week, and they all started at the same time. The difference here is that we're going to bring in those groups all at the same time, keep the staff consistent, and then 2 weeks later, those students are going to be allowed to go into their separate groups. So, great question. Another parent says, considering the school closure, would you have some activities that you would recommend for students who would be coming back home to do at home? You know, Rick, you can think about your answer while I'm just thinking. I'm pausing just to think about it because therapeutically, if they're coming home after this, I think setting up either a schedule of meetings online or even teletherapy or FaceTime or Skype therapy could be helpful. I've been asked this question and I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to provide Zoom meetings for our alumni, students, and clients. We're now providing them for our parents. We'd planned on this, I've said this several times, but we had planned on this in December before the COVID pandemic outbreak came to the United States. We were just doing it to be kind of service to families who couldn't make some of our support groups in our major cities where we have most of our alumni and clients coming from. But now we're doing it just for everybody, that everybody can attend any of these. So we're doing it for parents, and we're willing, if there is a need, to do it for clients that are coming home, if that's something that would be helpful to you all and helpful to your children. So I would say finding online resources like group meetings, AA meetings, refuge recovery meetings, contact the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, to see what resources for teletherapy or video therapy might be available. We're willing to provide something. In terms of therapeutic curriculum beyond that, I think that's probably best designed by a therapist that you would be working with, or even consultant if you're working with that consultant. Those are the first things that come to mind for me. I think all of the regular things that we're all being encouraged to do, which is find some safe outdoor time if that's available where you live, would be helpful. Find some time where each person can take their own space. You know, the kinds of things where you can move and exercise, all of the things that all of us are being encouraged to do would also apply to your children. But I think it's going to take some planning and some intention. The only thing I would just add on top of that, and I was going to say this tonight clinically anyway, be kind and patient to yourselves and your children, because in tight quarters like this, regression to more primitive, earlier, less kind of mature ways of cooperating and getting along with each other, that's going to come up for everybody. We are seeing that in our culture where couples and parents and children are finding it difficult to live in such close quarters. So be kind to yourself and find ways to take and give distance to each other also. Do you have anything to add to that, Rick?
Well, the only thing I was going to add is the last part you said. Well, one, the answer is yes. Definitely come up with those activities and those things that Brad listed. And it's going to be hard. I mean, it's hard as it is. And bringing someone home from treatment in this environment, just feeling the importance of highlighting that it's going to be hard. So just hang in there, stay committed, use the tools, and yeah, have activities to keep everybody busy.
I was talking to somebody this week and I was saying, I think as you know, if you've listened to any of these podcasts or broadcasts, I talk constantly about the idea that doing our own work is a part of it. And I would emphasize that right here. Even last night when I had my therapist, Jamie Gill, on the broadcast, there were some questions about the challenges of children being at home right now. And Jamie made the same point that I'm going to make right now, which is make sure that you have resources and are fortified. And what I said to this person I was talking to this week was, if you don't have a practice of therapy or support groups prior to COVID, it's going to be an added challenge to start that through some kind of teletherapy or video therapy. So, the best time to start therapy was 10 years ago. The second best time to start therapy is always today. So get involved in doing your work. Just because when you're doing your work, when you're talking to somebody, when you're unloading onto somebody, your stress, your fear, your anxiety, your frustration, you have just a little bit more capacity for your family and for the ones that you love. You come back to them with more patience. You come back to them with more ability to support them, to problem solve, to work through conflict. So make sure the emphasis is you getting fed, you doing your work in whatever ways you can. Podcasts, broadcasts. We've released the last 53 or so of our webinars on our YouTube channel, so you can go there, read self-help books, listen to other people's podcasts, all the things that you can do to make sure that you're fed as much as possible, because we're all going to be put to the test. We are all being put to the test on this. Like I've quoted Ram Dass as saying, and it's never been more applicable, if you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your family. And he died just before COVID, the COVID pandemic, but he would have agreed that if you think you're enlightened, really spend your time in quarantine at home with your family. That'll be the real test. So be kind to yourselves. Speaking of the future, would you consider at a later date, when things go back to normal, inviting current parents who missed the opportunity to see the field experience out to the field? I feel like I'd really like a window into my son's experience, even if later on. I love that idea. I mean, I haven't heard that question, but we're always open to anything like that. And so we've always had our parent weekends where you come out to the field program. We've always limited those to current parents, but we could definitely open that up to alumni families. And I would say, Rick, it's always based on need, right? If there's a need and we can staff it and fulfill it, we would. We would work to work on to bring several parents out for a weekend adventure to come out to the field and have some experience with or without their children. So my initial answer, and Rick is in charge of always the logistics, but my initial answer is if there's a need and we could do it, I can't see a reason why we wouldn't.
Right. We're very particular about who goes to the field for visits. And this parent who's asking, the answer would be yes. And even if it's coming with your son, it would be even better. But if he wasn't able to come, then yes, this would be definitely one of those exceptions we would make, that it's important for you to come to the field and see it and experience it and know what, to be able to have at least a window, a brief view of what they experienced out there.
Lindsay, it looks like Lindsay has shared the online link for AA meetings, so you can copy that right there. Another parent asks, We happen to live in a very hard-hit area, New York, New Jersey, and are very concerned about our ability to get our child to aftercare. What steps are in place to manage through this challenge?
Well, we could speak to some of the steps that we have in place, and can share a little bit of what I know from other places, but that's somewhat limited. But as far as the steps that we're taking is the same as going in when we're taking a student out of the field. We're avoiding the office a great deal. We'll come there so that they can get their clothes and take a shower there, but whoever's picking them up, we'll at best do it in the parking lot or do it off site. We're taking some of the kids to the airport and dropping them off. The best scenario would be to find to ensure that, well, I don't want to go against anybody else's potential referral, but to have someone with them traveling to their placement is what I'm getting at, would be the best scenario, to be able to have that added support in ensuring that they're taking the precautions they need to. Everybody who is going into the field, picking up whether it's to work or to pick up a client, is getting their temperature taken, as well as going through a full page of check boxes of that I haven't done this, I have done this, this is where I've been for the last 14 days. And I feel very confident that we've done all that we can to ensure that that employee has done everything they can to be healthy. They're the ones that are with them then from that point on until they come out of the field to where we would meet the people picking them up. So at that point, like I mentioned before, I know some programs will do additional screening or quarantining at their programs. The ones that I've talked to don't do that with the kids that are coming from Evoke, knowing that we have been basically they've been under quarantine, but also just on very extreme supervision throughout their time here, and then typically as well as while they're traveling there.
Thanks, Rick. Any thoughts, advice about kids who are coming out of these programs and now into COVID life? How to help them come into a world that isn't how they left it? You know,
That's good.
Go ahead.
I was saying that's a good question. You go ahead.
Yeah. It's probably just like most issues around parents and anxiety, which is try and take the child's lead. I mean, I think for most of us, think about it's the same kind of instruction we get when we're thinking about a child learning about sex. And that's what I think of is you take the child's lead and you respond to their questions, you respond to comments that they have, feelings that they have around it. And I think much less than we imagine, we really don't need to prepare something big for them. I'll say this for the kids across the board. They are far less focused and far less anxious than we are about COVID. Maybe some of them that are coming in are bringing that energy, but overall, the therapists are reporting consistently that the energy in the field is much calmer and much less focused on COVID. They have no exposure on a daily basis to any information except for the information that they need to have to keep themselves safe and reduce the risk. So when you think about how you're feeling and think about them and them coming home, just realize that that's where they've been. So I think I would just take their lead. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to prepare a lot. Like I said, there are going to be some really significant challenges if they come home to the family right after wilderness. And I already mentioned, and we talked about some of the things and activities and preparation and getting your own support that you can do. But you don't have to get it all resolved for them. And, Jamie said this last night, like at the end, I think one of the parents was was in a very difficult situation and was asking a very difficult question. And Jamie said, after offering a few suggestions, she said, ultimately, you have to come to terms with the fact that You can't fix it. You know that you've reached the end of what you can control. And I think that's one thing that COVID is doing for all of us is we're being confronted with the limitations of our control. So try to get resources, try to get support, take the child's lead, let them feel what they feel. It's okay to not have all the answers. And all of us, you and them included, are having to experience what it means to be ultimately to be out of control of all that we would love to control. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Rick.
Maybe just a little and say to you and everyone, I mean, this is what we train our staff on and with and parents as well of it, though the situation is significant, the situations can be very different, and how we deal with the pain, the hurt, the trauma is going to be very similar when it comes down to the tools in parenting and dealing with those things, and how you, Brad, and our other therapists are training our staff to do that in the field, as well as parents. It's going to look the same when it comes down to how to help that kid deal with COVID is those same tools as far as listening, giving them the space, holding it for them, and letting them be scared and worried and upset, just like any other situation. It's very unique and scary, and some of those tools are going to look very much the same.
Lindsay's passing on. In regards to the last question, Rick didn't answer the question. We are talking about physically not being able to get to Evoke to bring him to aftercare. Will an employee bring him or her to aftercare? What if there aren't people to pick him up?
Well, that was what I was starting to allude to, that there are transport companies that you could hire to do that. Some aftercare programs will pick them up. That is one thing that Evoke does historically, and even through this has not done, is to transport a client from our program to the aftercare. If you feel like that's something that you're really struggling with, talk to your therapist, and we can see what we can do to help support that. And in general, what I would say is that, yeah, there are independent travel companions, escorts, transport companies, as well as the aftercare programs themselves that can help facilitate that.
Before the COVID outbreak, about somewhere around 10% of our clients were transported to the next program by professionals. So that's obviously still an option, and even much more necessary in some cases and viable. So all we would be doing, all you would be doing, is making that service more readily available in times when it wouldn't be feasible for you to travel, coming from New York and New Jersey. So it's already been in place for all the years that we've been doing this, where transport companies can take young people from one program to another. So that's already in place. It's already something we can do.
And if it is out of our, sorry, Brad, if it is out of our Utah location from Entrada, we have and could have the potential to meet a program halfway. If the residential program is up in Salt Lake area, which happens to be a lot of programs up there, we do have the ability to meet that program halfway. So that's another potential resource.
Yeah, if they're close enough and within state, you might not even need a professional. You might need to, there can be some programs that can cooperate like us in another. That's a good point. Somebody says, our son just arrived last Wednesday. How isolated is he? He already was lonely and felt excluded before going.
He's not isolated in the sense that you're probably thinking of it. He's first 2 days, he's about 30 yards away from the group, and there's a staff checking in on with them every hour, giving them some assignments to work on. And by that second day, he's brought into the group, which at that point, he's just sitting about 10 feet away from the nearest other participant. So they're not isolated in the sense of being far away from the group. Being outdoors, it's easy to have someone 10 feet away and still be a part of the group. So they're practicing social distancing. We're quarantining them in a lot of ways, but they're still part of a group process and interacting with members of the group that way.
And it's our experience also that in those first couple of days that Rick is describing before they join the whole group, when they're sitting outside of the group, they actually get more attention from the staff one on one than they get when they're a part of the group because there's so much focus on them. They also have a
Absolutely.
mentor who's going to keep that safe physical distance also, who's also checking in with them during their time on that first phase. So they're sharing their story, they're asking their story. So in some ways they get more one-on-one attention during those first few days anyway. That's part of our model of observation of the newest student in the group, but we're just practicing safe distances when there's interaction. So yeah, it's not, none of this is easy, none of it is effortless, but like Rick says, it's not as dramatic or isolating as you might imagine, and they're getting a lot of attention from either a mentor or a staff member. A parent says, how are the kids in the field reacting to the COVID pandemic? Do they seem more anxious? Are they being given national news information? You can answer the last question, Rick, but I think I already answered the question about. I snuck a peek actually and saw this question, so it kind of snuck out of me. Um, Overall, across the board, much less anxious than most of us. And Rick, you can talk about the direction that the staff have been given to offer them the news nationally. Excuse me, about what's going on in the world.
They're not getting national news information. The therapist will give them a general update of how things are going, that there's a pandemic going, that there is a growing number of cases in certain cities, that it is increasing, that here's the efforts people are making. And it's generalized. They don't get the level of detail we do. And that does play into the anxiety piece that Brad said, is that, I mean, there are actually quite a few kids out there that continue just to joke about it, because they're not so caught up in the amount of news that we see, where they're that, well, if we get it, does that mean we get to go home?
Mm-hmm.
Is one of the questions. So some kids are concerned about it. Some kids want to learn more about it. And then some kids are like, okay, and just not that interested in it, that they know what's going on. And it's just one more thing that maybe they're getting left out of. But we're not seeing a lot of, it's very minimal amount of anxiety coming from the kids from it.
The lack of news, just, I mean, I don't. I've talked about this all week, this week and last week. I'm watching about 5% of the amount of news that I used to watch before the pandemic, and it took me a while to kind of catch on to that. Um, but it was too stressful. I mean, I want to keep updated a few times a day, making sure that any breaking information I'm getting. But exposure to the news, I've talked to a lot of people who have consciously, intentionally decided to limit their news intake and to limit their social media intake, because social media is not just information, but there's a lot of misinformation. And I've talked about this, there's a lot of trauma on social media, right? There's a lot of trauma responses about people talking about their fear and anxiety, and it's not very well contained. I talk about this therapeutic container, right? It's just being put out there. And we know that fear is contagious, right? We know that anxiety is contagious, that you can feel somebody's anxiety and feed off of it. So when I think about my own and the people that I'm talking to, when I think about their limited and their intentional consumption of news and social media, just think if you were in a situation unplugged and you had virtually no contact, no access to that information, except for the information that was on a need to know basis. And again, I would encourage you to keep that idea mindful in your letters. Talk to your therapist at Evoke to make sure that you're not, right. The child can't hold your anxiety, and so your anxiety in your letters about this pandemic is spilling out onto the pages in your letters and to the child. It's still going to be limited compared to what's going on at home, what we're doing to each other at home, but it's not necessary for them to have all that information. Just the stuff that they need to know, what's inside of their control for their safety and for reducing risk. Another parent says, your field staff live live off campus. How do you make sure they are not exposed and bringing it to the field? As you know, people can be carrier with no symptoms So by the time they develop a fever, it is too late.
Great question, and it's the biggest concern that we have as a program, as well as other programs, as well as the hospital level as well, is being able to keep the staff healthy. And that is you're right. Our staff work on a week on, week off basis. Some families, parents have said, well, Rick, why don't you just have them stay out there? Our staff need a break. They couldn't stay out there indefinitely. Some staff will stay a little longer than a week. The staff that are in that quarantine group are out there for 2 weeks, but the staff need to come out. And that is one of the bigger areas of, as far as risk management goes, that I spend my time about how to minimize that as much as we can. I can't guarantee that our staff might not get exposed and bring it to the field. Just cannot guarantee that. What I can guarantee is I'm doing everything that in my power to mitigate that risk. So one of the things I mentioned already is we have a document that the staff, as well as therapists or anybody who's going to the field, signs that has a check sheet of about 10 different things that talks about that I have not traveled anywhere, that I have not interacted with anybody that is sick, that I have not had any signs and symptoms in the last 14 days, that I've been socially isolating myself at home and have not gone out anywhere. If I have gone out, where did you go? Grocery store, what day, how long, and the details of where they went. And they go through and tell us everything, everywhere, and how and why, and as well as us taking their temperature. We had someone with a snuffly nose that we wouldn't send to the field. Someone that we're pretty confident that she was healthy, but it kept reading 99 degrees. Sorry, we didn't let her go to the field. We're just being as strict as we can with asking what our employees are doing on their off time as far as restricting themselves, and then also doing everything we can before they go out to the field of making sure that they have taken all the precautionary measures they have had.
Rick, I don't know if you saw this or not, but I saw one of the programs, residential treatment programs in the field, was actually asking for staff members to have longer shifts. Again, there's no guarantee. All we can do is all we can do to minimize risk, right? That's really what we're talking about, is minimizing the risk as much as possible. And there's no 100% guarantee unless nobody goes anywhere and does anything. But with the shift that we already have in place, where staff go out for 8 days, that's a pretty limited amount of exposure for that time. So you're not even going through the way you would at schools, programs, schools, hospitals, of course, where people are going in on 12-hour shifts or even 2-day shifts. You're talking about 8-day shifts. And so while we can't guarantee, while we can't put 100% protection measures in place and still run a program for youth that are at risk, what we can do is do our best to minimize the risk. And I think that's what we're doing. And you're spending a lot of your time doing. A parent asked this question: are the kids hearing some of the amazing things people are doing to come together to help each other, healthcare workers, neighbors, to balance the other COVID news? I hope that's included. I can't speak to every group. I know it's being talked about in some groups. I do some of the supervision with our therapists, and they're talking about some of that, sharing about some of the examples of even the way that our climate is responding, the way that the pollution is down, and things like that. Some of those stories of hope have been shared with the various therapists that I'm talking to. So I don't know of that in every group, but I think you're right that it's part of what is helping all of us, I think, heal and find some peace, is that we're finding these other messages about heroes. We're finding these other messages and feelings of gratitude and service out there. So I don't know, and you're welcome. We invite you to share those stories in your letters, because that's part of the spiritual part of this thing that we're all going through, is to balance out some of the fear and some of the the sadness and the grief that we're all feeling with some of the amazing lessons and things that are happening in the world that are good.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Brad, yes, but I'm sure there's room for more. And please share that. That'd be a great thing for you to share in your letters, for them to be able to share with the whole group.
Can't have too much of that. How do you manage another parent asks, how do you manage the logistics of the parents who will show up to pick up their children? Do they wait outside and the child will come out to meet them?
Yeah, our first preference is to meet either at the airport or a coffee shop or somewhere off-site. And I'll tell you why, is because if we meet in the parking lot, inevitably someone's going to need to go to the bathroom. And my preference is to have nobody come into our office. I believe that you're taking the measures that you're trying to, that you are as a parent or whoever it is. And that's just us doing our due diligence as much as we can to limit. I mean, it's a bit of a ghost town in the office because we have so many people able to work off site to do things that it is just essential personnel that are in the office. And so at best, yes, it's meeting in the parking lot of the office. The preference will be when you're talking to your therapist to set that up about how can we meet at this coffee shop or this corner or at your hotel, that we'll drop them off there at the lobby is the preferred location of where they would be dropped off.
Any other questions or comments, Lindsay, that have come in? Lindsay's passing on this one. This is more of a general question, but I have read a few articles that mention that what a lot of people are feeling is related to grief. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how it relates to anxiety? Yeah, I've read that too. I've read a lot about that we're all experiencing a collective grief. I have a few comments on that. Probably the greatest challenge in this collective grief, and they talk about this when they teach you about doing grief therapy and grief work in school, that when a family, for example, has a loss, that one of the reasons why you have an outside counselor, grief therapist come in is because your partner, your children, everybody's dealing with their own grief and everybody deals with it differently. So it's hard for me to be there for you, right? If we live in the same house and are sharing the same grief, it's hard for us to be there for each other because number one, I'm carrying the heavy weight myself. Number two, we might be grieving differently and then some conflict can get in there, right? About how you're doing it is different than how I'm doing it and vice versa. And it starts to be this kind of power struggle around who's doing it right or not. So that's one thing. And because we're all sharing this grief in some way, this loss of freedom, for some people, loss of work, for some people, loss of purpose, definitely a loss of feeling fundamentally safe in some activities and in the world in ways that we were feeling 2 or 3 weeks ago. Because we're all feeling this, we have to find ways to get support outside of our families, with professionals, with people who can hold us. I said this is our 8th, I think, broadcast that we've done in this series. I think that's right. And part of the idea was just opening up a place where you could come. And you'll notice if you've been on any of these that sometimes I just say, thanks for showing up. You're not alone. And we're in this together. Because part of what maybe the most fundamental healing aspect in the treatment of grief is that you don't have to do it alone. That somebody else can connect to you in your grief. And so we have to be really creative about this. I've been told by Rick, I've been told by some other people, because I'm holding a lot of space for a lot of people. And I've been reminded that I need to make sure that I'm finding places, excuse me, that I'm finding places and people to carry some of the weight that I'm carrying. Even just having my therapist on Tuesday night, or last night, it wasn't my therapy session, but I felt a great deal of support, of just energy that came from that experience. I loved sharing her with you, and I love what she had to say. But that was something for me. And so the last thing that I'm going to give up these days, for sure, the last thing that I'm going to give up is my therapy. And I'm going to have to make sure that even with my family, that sometimes I'm going to have to take space. Sometimes I'm going to have to take a time out. Sometimes I'm going to try to be there for them, but sometimes I'm also going to just have to be there for myself. So those are some thoughts I have around the grief, but the loss is real. One thing we know about grief is that it triggers old traumas, old losses. So that's happening for a lot of us. And then the last thing I'll say, if you look at Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, which has been updated, and there's definitely, it doesn't go in an orderly fashion as they originally suggested, there's a lot of feelings in there that are common, which is denial, which some of us have gone through. And there are moments of the day when I myself am in this surreal kind of place where I'm in denial, to bargaining, to anger, to sadness, and to acceptance. And what we know about grief is that we don't go through it, like I said, in a linear step-by-step fashion. We can kind of go back and forth and around it. So just making sure that you give yourself space, and that you, if you can, find somebody else, a support group, an online support group, a therapist, any of these broadcasts, live or recorded, that you can find some place where you don't feel so alone in what you're feeling. And then that, I had somebody say to me one time in therapy, when I talk to you, you don't take away my pain, but you take away the feeling or the thought that I have that I might be crazy. And just that thought that I'm not crazy adds to my peace and well-being. I still have the grief, I still have the pain and the loss, but it's not exacerbated by the feeling that something is wrong with me the way that I'm dealing with it. So those are my thoughts about the grief aspect. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Rick.
No, I wouldn't add into that. That's great. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Is there a plan if a staff member client does test positive?
Yes. Well, there's multiple plans. And one is, or the first two or three are ones that have always been in place. Part of our risk management plan is that if it's a staff who shows any one symptom of anything, they're immediately pulled from the field. And what that looks like is they're given a mask to wear and brought in from the field, and then they have to self-quarantine for 14 days until 14 days since the last time they showed a symptom. And then the truck is sanitized after that staff is brought in. If it is a client, they're put on a space away from the group. So similar to the way I was talking, they're not isolated per se, but they're take some extra distance. They're about 20 to 30 yards away from the group. So they're still there, but off to the side and monitored. And that's our normal approach when we are dealing with someone with flu-like symptoms or something that could be contagious. Since then, we've adapted that to where that they're monitored, and we check in with our medical coordinator, and typically that student would likely be put on what we call walkabout, so that they're totally separate from the group with the staff. And so then we would have two staff committed to that one student to observe. And if it's just a fever or a cough, we're observing until it was to a point where the medical coordinator would say, okay, they need to come in and see a doctor. At that point, it'd be done the same way I talked about the staff. And if they came in, if they tested positive, then we would self-quarantine them outside, like in a hotel room is probably what it would look like, until we were able to work with the family to find a placement or a way for them to get home.
To clarify, Rick, I just want to say, if our medical staff suspect that it's COVID, they'll be extracted from the field and tested.
Not immediately, but if there are symptoms that persist that are concerning, then they will have to do that. Right now, a lot of the kids, most people of the clients our age, if they have a fever, they are just sent home. the hospitals aren't testing them. We're getting there, and this is why this is evolving. By next week, that policy, that procedure will probably change. But right now, in both of our locations, as well as most places, there has to be some medical concern to be able to get tested. So if there's just a fever, but they're doing okay, we would keep them in the field until the medical coordinator says, no, they need to come out. And just to be clear, and this is what Brad is also saying, we pull our kids out. When I say a concern enough to have them pulled, that's not a very high bar to reach for a kid to be pulled to go to see a doctor. That's a very low bar. It's something that we just don't mess around with. It. Kids will come out with a tummy ache, and 99 out of 100 times it's constipation, but that's not our call. We'll pull them, we'll bring them to the doctor, get checked out. And so, and again, that's what it is today. Tomorrow, 2 weeks from now, when testing is a lot more accessible, several of our procedures will probably look different.
A parent asks, how often do the kids take a shower, wash their hands, etc.?
They're required to shower at least twice a week, which might seem like not a lot to some, but out there it is a lot. And if they're not doing it, it turns into a clinical issue where the therapists, the staff, everybody's getting involved and really giving that a lot of attention. What that looks like out there is everything from, looks like a giant Ziploc bag with a hose connected to it. It's called a sun shower. And they'll heat up their cooking pots on the fire stove with warm water, and then fill up that bag, and given a designated spot, we'll set up a tarp so they have that warm water and soap and shampoo, and then they'll go off and take their shower. And they have laundry that comes out once a week where we're doing their laundry, and in that laundry bag has multiple articles of clothing for them to change out. So there's enough underwear and socks and an extra pair of pants and fleece and things in that laundry bag that they change out every week, so they have enough laundry for the week to exchange while they're washing. They're washing their hands before COVID. They're doing it before any meal or after going to the bathroom. So at least 4 or 5 times a day. Now they're doing it a lot more. The directive to the staff is any opportunity you have to do hand wash, do it. So whenever they're done with the camp, whenever they're done with the hike and get into camp, they're doing a hand wash before all the meals, and any other downtime before and after. Anytime that they're separated doing their assignments, working on letters, anytime where there's off to a little bit of space, after that's a great time to do your hand wash, because you don't know how much of this or what was going on. So let's do another hand wash, and doing it as often as we can.
Yeah, I think
when I say this and this, I'm wiping my nose, and for those who can't see, and
yeah. So before COVID, our clients and students were washing their hands more than they ever were before. And now they're definitely washing it much more than they ever have before, and quite a bit. So that's something, and it's actually a literal thing that you're accountable for, that you have to call attention to the staff that you're doing it, and be accountable to a staff member that you're washing your hands. So that's, like Rick said, some of the things that we're doing were either in place at a basic level, and many of those have been increased because of COVID, like hand washing. So it's happening quite a bit out there.
To elaborate on what you're saying, the level system that we have, right? Earth, fire, water, that air that maybe some of you are familiar with, but the clients are able to kind of move up on these levels. Earth phase is 2 days, and then fire phase is the second phase. And one of the things that they have to get checked off daily during fire phase is personal hygiene, which included in brushing their teeth and other things is getting it checked off that they're washing their hands.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for joining us. And of course, thank you for all you're doing every day to make sure to reduce the risk and help the kids and the staff to be as safe as possible. I know I've expressed that appreciation. Somebody adds to you. Thank you for the risks you and all of your staff are taking for our kids and our families. So thanks, Rick, and thanks for joining us to give us some of that updated information tonight.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks, everybody. And thanks for saying about the staff. They'll pass that on. They'll appreciate that.
Thanks for joining us this evening. We'll have an announcement for our next broadcast coming up. As always, I hope this is a helpful point of contact, especially during COVID. I hope it can offer you some peace and some security in such uncertain times. So have a great evening. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.